A malfunctioning Jupiter is going to display the traits of Jupiter in Capricorn, the energetic environment, the zodiac sign where Jupiter is debilitated. So when the force of consciousness Jupiter is not functioning well, it's going to have that incompatibility that Jupiter has in Capricorn within yourself. But this doesn't necessarily mean that if your Jupiter in your natal chart is in Capricorn, you're going to be have a faulty Jupiter per se. There are cancellations of debilitations. There are certain configurements that allow your Jupiter to flourish, even though it's in that zodiac sign. But a person with Jupiter in Capricorn and any person with a malfunctioning Jupiter is going to have these kinds of traits specifically to them. So it's very important to emphasize that your Jupiter could be in any zodiac sign, but when it's malfunctioning, it's going to have these specific traits of when Jupiter is not functioning well, and that is when Jupiter is in Capricorn. So Capricorn is an earth sign, which means that the concrete, tangible reality is the main focus of that sign, and it's ruled by Saturn, which means that hard work, long-term hard work and effort are the abilities that a person will gain from a focus of Capricorn in your chart. So essentially long-term projects, and that can take years and even decades to accomplish, that is one of the abilities that Capricorn gives us. So Jupiter is the force in our consciousness of inner joy and knowledge and of our higher purpose, as we discussed in the first video. So it's the planet we use to get a bird's eye view of reality and of our life. But in Capricorn, Jupiter has a very tough time to rise above tangible existence and see the bigger picture. So an unhealthy Jupiter in general is going to get easily bogged down by mundane troubles and difficulties. Even though those things are important to handle within our life, we have a Saturn to deal with existential difficulties and a Mars to problem solve through difficulties. That's why Mars is exalted in Capricorn. The details that are our daily work and our daily routine and our existence, a person where Jupiter is involved with that kind of daily work, people can feel very stuck in the rut, and oftentimes a person's work life is going to be dominating their consciousness in a day-to-day perspective. They get dominated by the things that they have to do and accomplish. But at the same time, they're not going to be getting a lot of inner joy from it. So life will feel like it's this unending grind, and there are few moments of repose, you could say, in between those moments of concentration on daily work that needs to get done. So Jupiter has this ability of abstract thinking, which allows a person to see patterns of things that don't seemingly interrelate, but deep on the fundamental level, they're interrelated. Everything is connected via the ether, the element that Jupiter rules. So Mercury is the other planet that gives us pattern recognition. But Mercury's pattern recognition comes from the objective investigative process, like a step-by-step way at arriving at a more complex truth or a bigger picture, a bigger pattern. Jupiter's pattern recognition is this inner intuitive understanding that everything's connected in some way, shape, or form, even if, like I said, they don't seem to be on the surface related to one another. And so it's the ether that's connecting everything. And there's this web of interconnectivity of this divine energy that is very often outside of our human perception, our ability as human beings to see things as all interconnected. Sometimes we try to separate things too much, but there's this reality beyond human perception, and Jupiter is this force within us that allows us to get to those deeper levels that everything is interconnected and seeing it, and there's kind of an intuitive ability to get there, but to be able to perceive that everything is interconnected. When Jupiter is malfunctioning, the person will look out into the world, and instead of being able to see divine patterns or see meaning in even the smallest things in life, instead, what they'll see is chaos, and that only their personal effort, again, a very Saturnian and Capricornian feeling, only their personal ability to make things happen and to be able to manifest and create a life that they want, that is what's holding everything together. And it's hard for a person with a malfunctioning Jupiter to grasp the complex factors at play in life. As I keep saying, the interconnectedness of everything, and how other people's intentions are intertwined with our own intentions and our own thoughts and feelings, and how certain events that we're meant to experience in life, they're meant for our personal growth, even though, say, it's a negative or undesirable event that happens to us. instead of being able to have gratitude in things that happen against our will, the person will try to exercise as much control as possible over their fate, over their destiny. And this can make a person feel extremely burdened by all of the responsibilities of life. And it's like feeling like you're running up a muddy hill. A person with a malfunctioning Jupiter puts so much emphasis on that necessity of, I've got to get this done, and I am the controller and the manifester of my fate, pure and simple. And it's not taking into account all of the other factors, all the other subtleties of life that we don't have control over. And so they have this tendency, a person with a malfunctioning Jupiter, a tendency to see the world as this material, mechanized system, and that they have to tinker with it so that the output turns out into what they want to get out of life. And so there's no mystery. And as I keep saying, the ether, it's this outside of human perception. There's a natural mystery to that. And there's a natural awe that we can sit back and appreciate, that we don't have complete knowledge of every single thing. That knowledge is accessible to us through the ether, and we can obtain divine knowledge, theoretically infinite divine knowledge. But at the same time, we're human beings and we have these limitations. And there's kind of a point you step back and you say that I'm going to accept and relish the mystery of life. And a person with a malfunctioning Jupiter doesn't want to say, okay, there's something I don't know and I'm going to enjoy the mystery of the divinity of life. What they're going to try to do is they're going to be trying to adjust life to an extreme extent, as much as they feel like they need to do, in order to try to control as much of the factors in their life as possible. So essentially, personal effort is a major virtue and a major aspect of these people's philosophy with a malfunctioning Jupiter. And that's not a bad thing to have, is say hard work is important to live life by, this Capricornian trait of hard work is necessary. But this kind of unhealthy Jupiter that can be in any sign, when they achieve success in their life, because they can become successful and rich, of course, because natal charts are complex. Just because you have the planet of wealth in a debilitated or unhealthy doesn't mean you can't amass a bunch of material wealth. When they become successful and they see things work out to their liking, they attribute that to their incredible amount of ingenuity, their grit, their ability to tough it out, and their ability to make life work on their terms. Now this leads to essentially the most basic toxic Jupiterian trait, which is arrogance. So an arrogant person will be inflating, expanding their own personal contribution to the world. We talked about in the first video about what is humility. Humility is essentially the opposite of arrogance. And these people with this toxic Jupiter, when they become successful, and even if they're not very successful, they'll treat themselves and they'll act towards the world as if they are more important and that they're more special because they've achieved something that can be objectively important. They can make a big change on the world. But they see it as they manifested something, but you didn't. And so therefore they have a greater role in the divine fabric of life. And so it's important to distinguish between arrogance and confidence. These can be very misunderstood, because you can be simultaneously confident and humble because you're confiding in yourself. You're confident in yourself is the same root word there. You believe your abilities you believe in your abilities to manifest what your soul wants to express, while also at the same time being humble, a healthy amount of humility, and respecting that you're not the only person who can manifest something in life, and other people have amazing abilities. So a healthy amount of humbleness is to say, not to denigrate yourself, but to respect the ability of other people to be able to manifest what they want. But you cannot be arrogant and humble at the same time, because arrogant people, they're not listeners. They aren't reading what's around them and responding in a harmonious way to their responding. So I said that Jupiter, the sense that Jupiter rules over is our ability to hear. An arrogant person over time, they're closing off their ability to listen to what the world is telling them. They don't want to be humbled. They want to see the world from their eyes and their eyes own. They're kind of isolating their individual contribution, their individual self, whereas Jupiter as a force, a healthy Jupiter force, wants to connect oneself with the rest of divinity, the rest of creation, to see beyond oneself. An arrogant person is essentially only desiring to see oneself and what they can do and manifest in the world. So this toxic Jupiter trait, what it's doing is that you're consciously separating yourself from the rest of the fabric of creation, and you're inflating your importance in it. So there are movers and shakers in the world, people who have great influence, people whose contributions they hold more weight, and that is a reality. But where would all of those people be if they all didn't have, say, servants cooking or people cleaning their house, people driving them around, doing the work that they didn't want to do? So you see that these people who are important people, who have secret service agents or bodyguards or assistants and secretaries, they are dependent upon the other people who are working for them or serving them. So they have a relationship. Say they're paying those people to do that, but there's a relationship there. They're intertwined with the rest of reality, but they aren't seeing it that way. So it's arrogance and this wanting to see someone separate, even though they're dependent on other people, and they're intertwined in the fabric of reality to an inexplicable level. There's no actual separating yourself from everything happening around you, but they are trying to separate themselves from everyone else around you. Now that's completely different from confidence, believing in oneself. So make sure to understand what confidence is and be able to understand if a person is merely confident or they have these traits of arrogance. And that arrogance is that toxic Jupiterian trait. So you can see arrogance comes from a faulty belief system, and Jupiter is the force that generates our belief system in life. And that faulty belief system is seeing that everyone is there to serve you and that you're not actually intertwined in the destinies and fates of other people, that there is no connection between you and them. You're more important. So Jupiter is this force of human nature that generates our belief system. A malfunctioning Jupiter is going to place extreme emphasis on their own belief system. And these people can be very radicalized people and find it very difficult to place, they have a difficulty in reflecting on how other people are creating their own belief systems, and have a difficulty relating to the way other people are seeing and perceiving the world, and when that worldview is different. And to be able to kind of connect worldviews and find similarities rather than just focus on the differences, and that there are factors that possibly they haven't considered that are valid. So it's almost as if these people, this faulty Jupiter consciousness, they want to live and die in their worldview, in their way of perceiving how reality works, their philosophy. And they can be very hesitant to adjust their beliefs because they have so much psychologically riding on it. They're extremely dependent on their belief system being correct. They're very hardened in a certain way, you could say, than, say, a person with a more fluid belief system that is willing to change their mind. Jupiter Capricorn trait and Jupiter toxic Jupiter is very they can be very closed off about what they believe, and will want to at times force other people to believe what they believe, or will completely ignore other people who believe something different, and, like I said, write them off, that, oh yeah, whatever, you don't think what I think, there's no use for you, in a sense. That arrogance, that natural arrogance that comes from a very hardened belief system that they are not willing to change. So naturally you would think that a person who has the planet of spirituality, Jupiter, debilitated and unhealthy and malfunctioning in their life, you would think that these would be the perfect candidates to become atheists. And there is a pattern there, but I think I've seen it much less common that debilitated Jupiter creates atheism. So having a weak and unhealthy Jupiter in general in a chart in any sign, a person can have that tendency to dwell on the fact that there is no God, because as I said in the beginning, they kind of see this mechanistic worldview that their effort is tantamount to making things manifest in their life. They are failing to see the influences that are very subtle but are there, that are affecting their life on a minuscule but also very important level, on a very influential level, and our interdependency between one another. So a faulty and a debilitated or unhealthy Jupiter, they're failing to see higher powers at work. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily an atheist. They could be agnostic, or they could say they believe in God, or they believe in divine things. But they have trouble seeing bigger plans at play that are beyond their own understanding. And that those plans, the divine plans, and the interrelatedness of our destiny mixed in with the destinies of other people, they're never going to be fully, completely, consciously aware of them, but they have to develop this trust in them. So there can be this sense that God has abandoned them, or that God is very cruel, like how the Old Testament portrays the Bible, and that all that, at the end of the day, all that matters is their own survival. And so they look after themselves as a top priority. When things go good, they thank God. When things go bad, they shake their fist at God. So that's a very Capricornian trait. And so Capricorn is the sign of this practical materiality and this physicality, but that's weighing Jupiter down. Jupiter wants to have these lofty ambitions, to see things from a bird's eye view, and to see this bigger perspective, the interrelatedness of things, and to see the world in universal terms and the totality of things. And that is a very majestic kind of worldview, as imperfect as that the world may appear to us and to our earthly selves. The malfunctioning Jupiter always keeps getting brought down into the basics of survival and the importance of their own effort to get things done. So an unhealthy and a malfunctioning Jupiter, what it's suffering from is this lack of deeper meaning that will thread the rest of their life together. This purpose that extends their life over the long period of time, to get beyond the day-to-day material, to find something meaningful that is beyond themselves, as we talked so much about in the first video. So most people are going to suffer from some kind of this kind of thinking at some point in their life, this kind of questioning of who am I? The big questions in life, and what am I doing, and what am I doing here in my life that is beyond this drudgery of making money just to survive, just to put a roof over my head? What is the bigger meaning? That essential Jupiter question. So a weak Jupiter is going to tremble at these questions, and they're going to have this kind of sense of fear, because what is Capricorn focusing on us? How to survive in a material sense. A lot of our survival mechanism comes from the fear of things not working out. So when a person asks these big Jupiterian questions, they can have this fear response, this fear of death, and this lack of optimism that a strong and healthy Jupiter is going to derive from the struggles of life. So you'll see this fear response in these people. They'll live life from a fear-based perspective, or their belief system. They may not say, I'm a fear-based person, but you'll see when they explain their philosophy, it comes from a place of not being able to make things work in a practical sense, rather than a place of hoping for the best, preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, and seeing that there's things that they can't account for that are there, these divine principles that are at work, and create this kind of philosophy that is seeing yourself interconnected with the rest of creation. So a malfunctioning Jupiter is going to have a fear-based philosophy. An extremely important part of Jupiter is that it is the planet of faith. So faith is this inner trust in the divine plan that includes seeing oneself in this big picture. So a malfunctioning Jupiter doesn't want to commit to any kind of inner trust into something larger than themselves and their immediate desires. So the word Islam actually means submission. So a Muslim person, their religion is saying that they're in submission to God, for better or worse, to their personal desires. Now there is some part that I don't fully agree with, because there is personal agency. To be in a complete state of submission at all times in one's life, it will negate our ability to make changes on the world. So pure submission isn't going to be fully isn't going to be, it's not a complete way of seeing the necessity of having to do things that where your personal willpower is important. But the idea of submission is a very powerful trait, to be able to say that let me work as a tool for God. Allow God to work through me. I'm submitting myself to a higher power. That's a very profound place to be mentally and spiritually. And Islam is a very beautiful religion in that. And I remember the first time I realized the deepness of what submission means, to be a willing instrument to be used in the divine plan. It's a very empowering thing. Rather than say, I'm just a slave to God, to be able to have divine work through you, it empowers you to do things that you would never imagine you'd be able to do, because you're working for something bigger than yourself. And Jupiter is this planet that allows a person to enhance that ability and to feel that working through them. But a weak Jupiter, it will hesitate in this, and it will not want to submit to life in a more abstract way. And they want to stay in the here and now, in the practical world of material truth. But that kind of abstract, intuitive feeling of submitting oneself and to trust and to have faith that you're not going to be able to understand exactly the ins and outs of everything having to do with it. As I said, to relish in the mystery of life, but to have faith that there is something bigger happening. A malfunctioning Jupiter doesn't want to go there, so to say. So these people, if they can't see or touch it, and that they can't verify that it's real, they're going to be doubtful about it. They're not going to really have this kind of blind faith. Isn't necessarily a good thing, but taking that leap of faith to be able to trust is a very important quality that allows a person to expand their awareness. So a malfunctioning Jupiter, there's little room for them to have faith in something bigger than themselves, and that the parameters of truth, they extend beyond our human perception. They want to keep it in the here and now. You can almost think of it as a very scientific way of seeing the world, rather than getting to this more subtle levels of reality. So one of the central characteristics of a toxic Jupiter is the lack of gratitude. So a very strong and wise Jupiter, it's not going to cower away from the sufferings of life or try to ignore suffering. Very much to the contrary. So if you have the expansive understanding of Jupiter within you, you're realizing that obviously difficulties and pain and tragedies and misfortunes, these are all experiences that play a very important part of life on Earth. An unhealthy Jupiter, on the other hand, is going to do one of two things, or both of these things. First, they're going to try to ignore the tragedies of life, that excessive optimism, and they'll only want to see the positive and be ignorantly idealistic and pretend that positive thinking is the be-all and end-all. Well, you're not seeing the totality of life from the bird's eye view when you're trying to block out everything that you deem to be bad or undesirable. So it's this kind of naive limitation that they're creating in themselves, to want to not accept that negative things happen in the world. Not to dwell on them, but to just admit that they're there and to account for them in your worldview. So it's this blocking out of anything that they're afraid to have to deal with that they think is negative or bad. So the second way that an unhealthy Jupiter is going to deal with life's difficulties, as I just said, is to dwell on the difficulties and the negativity and then amplify those things about how pain and suffering are outweighing the positive. And then they'll be neglecting how life will always find a balance, even if you're not still living to see it. But what these two perspectives, these two kind of coping mechanisms of a negative Jupiter, to ignore the sufferings and tragedies of life or to dwell on them, what is similar between them two is this lack of gratitude for the necessity of suffering as a building block towards a more complete perspective on life. So it's very easy to be thankful about to God or to life when things are going great, even though some people still won't be thankful. But when life is very difficult, that's the real challenge. How are you going to be grateful for the undesirable things that happen to you, and really meditate on that thought, being grateful for undesirable things happening to you? Because those things that happen, they have a purpose, and there's a reason why they happen. And it's life calling on us and teaching us how to improve ourselves in some way. And it's our responsibility to discover what that is. Jupiter is this planet of higher learning. And that is very important element of higher learning, is to see that everything is there to teach us something about ourselves or about life in general. So some things are fated to happen in our life. We're meant to have certain experiences. They're part of the plan that we create before we incarnate. And we have these opportunities to live out these experiences. And even if we, in our material self, they don't feel like they don't feel good, so we think that it was some kind of mistake. But there is no mistake, because you can always find something useful to every experience. So when you're ignoring the negativity of life, you're not seeing that all of that could teach me something important. When you're dwelling on the negativity of life, you think that there's some kind of error and there's something wrong. And overemphasizing the bad things that are happening and not seeing that, oh, there's a positive from all of that. To be able to be grateful for that, to teach me something, and so to get out of the negative and to not be focus one's consciousness in that kind of toxic world that brings you down into this nihilistic worldview. So I think that common courtesy is one of the easiest ways to cultivate a general sense of gratitude in life, and to be able to live your life with gratitude always flowing through you. So saying pleases and thank yous for even the littlest things that are done for you, and doing it with respect, genuine respect, not just out of habit. And this simple act of respecting other people, and especially the people who are closest to you that you're always around, doing that in daily life generates this natural gratitude for all circumstances. So an ungrateful person, just like how as a server, as a waiter in restaurants, of course you come by tons of ungrateful people. What they do when, say, you're not saying thank you and please for basic things, or just showing common respect and common courtesy, the ungrateful person who don't have these traits of common courtesy, what they find themselves doing is that they feel like they're alone in their own suffering, because they're not seeing how when some doors shut, other doors are going to be opening. And life doesn't end when one part of our life ends. We're meant to keep moving and learning something new, even in the most difficult of circumstances. And so those are kind of the profound things to be grateful for. But those profound things to be grateful for, you have to create a habit of being grateful for everything, including the small things that are happening around you. So gratitude in and of itself is one of the most important spiritual conditions a person can have. And a weak and struggling Jupiter, an unhealthy and toxic Jupiter, it's not going to fully understand and feel gratitude for everything, and not just the positive things. So Jupiter is the force in our consciousness that is our ability to listen to a teacher or a counselor, which I've kind of been alluding to, listening to life tell you things and teach you things. And it's also the planet of the astrologers as a spiritual guide. So a weak Jupiter is much more likely not to want to hear, of course, because it's this planet of hearing. They don't want to hear advice from other people, and they are much less likely to seek advice, even from a psychologist or someone who they may know or may depend on in other ways. So I've seen actually a kind of insincerity with a weak Jupiter consciousness. They'll behave like they're listening, and they'll even be asking questions, but really within them, they've already made up their mind, and they're much less open to understanding a perspective that's different from their own, that other points of view have validity. So you can kind of sense that they are being a bit facetious, and that they're like, oh yeah, okay, but you know that they're not going to do what you're recommending, or they're not actually kind of absorbing what you're saying. They are just kind of being pleasant with you, but there's an insincerity to it. And so a weak Jupiter is much less open to receiving perspectives and advice from other people. So we're going to really dive into the exalted Jupiter in our next video, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, which is the sign of the movement of our inner reality, our inner consciousness, and particularly our ability for emotional intelligence and to know what we're feeling and why we're feeling something. So a toxic Jupiter, or a malfunctioning Jupiter in any sign, but when it's malfunctioning within us, is really going to suffer from a lack of understanding of the complexity of their inner world. And they can be easily confused about what they are feeling and why other people may feel differently, or why other people are feeling what they're feeling. And so they'll be very much more prone to be misreading their own inner condition and the inner conditions of other people. So toxic Jupiter, they have this kind of blockage where what they feel is very mysterious to them, and they aren't able to move into a logical understanding for why they feel what they feel, that there's a reason behind it. And if the person does not grow in more self-understanding and work to heal their Jupiter and be able to open themselves up to an expansive worldview that all of reality is interconnected, what can happen is that they can create a very hardened personality. Again, because Capricorn is such a materialistic sign, and it's all about survival. Capricorn is I like to use the ancient Vedic symbol of Capricorn, which is a crocodile. Think of the ancient crocodile creature, the hardened, the armor-like skin, the ability to survive for tens of thousands of years in essentially the same condition. So a person who has this kind of hardened personality, they'll be extremely pragmatic, which can be very positive and a very realistic point of view. But there's a big danger to being when they're extremely pragmatic in this way, to them becoming cynical and to subscribe to that mechanistic or fatalistic way of looking at the fabric of how reality works. As I was also alluding to when I was talking about submission, we all have this willpower that can change and manifest and create new realities and create new ways of thinking about the world. But this hardened personality, again, will come into this kind of cynical, mechanistic way of seeing how things work. So what all these traits lead to, as I've said at the beginning of the video, when Jupiter is unhealthy in our consciousness, is the inability or a lack of a desire to relish in the mysteries of life. That there are many factors outside of our immediate control that we're never going to fully understand during our present life. So there's a very famous quote from Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, which I have here at the bottom of my bookshelf. It was my favorite book until I read his follow-up book, Anna Karenina. Leo Tolstoy was a master of human psychology. He could describe the inner conditions of other people, and he would get to such amazing understandings of the motivations of other people, and he could do it in these long, and I think War and Peace has over 1,000 characters or something like that. It's an amazing, his probing into the human psychology is incredible, and he was one of the great master novelists. So in his book War and Peace, one of the main characters, Pierre, he says, "All that I can know is that I know nothing, and that is the height of human wisdom." So there's a lot in that quote, and as you can see, it's dealing with wisdom and what is wisdom, and we're talking about Jupiter, the planet of wisdom. Well, in that part of the book, Pierre is in an existential crisis, and he's in this place where he can't see meaning or deeper purpose to his life, the interconnectedness of things. And essentially, War and Peace is a book about the interconnectedness of all people and how the smallest things from peasant to peasant that lead up all create what we call history. And his book War and Peace was meant to dispute the idea that there are great people in history, like Napoleon, which is his example. That Napoleon didn't do what he did because he was great. It was all of these other millions of small interactions that created the situation of Napoleon. I used to really subscribe to that theory, but I'm a little bit more on the fence about it now. I do believe that certain people come and incarnate with major missions, and their influence has a major effect that is not just the result of millions of small interactions, as Tolstoy said. But Pierre, when he says all that we can know is that we know nothing, and that's the height of human wisdom, he's in a negative frame of mind when he says that. Because what he says is very true. We know nothing. We know something, but there's so much to know that we, in comparison, know nothing. And that's, a very wise place to be. But there's a follow-up to that realization that has to happen, which he doesn't make. And famously, Tolstoy was a born-again Christian. You can call it a born-again Christian. Not in the contemporary born-again Christian, but Tolstoy essentially disavowed his two great novels, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, and said that they were just, I think he said, secular drivel. He said that they were basically useless and a waste of time, which they're not. But he has this deep existential crisis that he doesn't resolve in these early books that he would later on resolve in his later writing. So Pierre's existential crisis, what Tolstoy is working out through the character Pierre, was missing that part of, yes, indeed, there is an end point of seeking knowledge. All that we can know is that we really know nothing, and that there's this infinity of consciousness and in creation, that we cannot know everything. But that's not an end point of human wisdom. It's actually the starting point. And that starting point is faith in God and faith in a higher power. That divinity is both within us and it's surrounding us. And that we're not meant to know everything, but that there still is a divine pattern. So that's what the leap of faith is, to say, I don't know anything, but there is a consciousness that knows everything. There's an all that is. There's an entirety to everything. And that faith frees a person, and that gives a person a much more profound vision and trust in reality that then removes that depressive existential crisis. So that would be the unhealthy Jupiter, having that ending point is that we know nothing, and that's all that we can ever know. That toxicity of we're just this minuscule little flesh and blood, and that's all we're ever going to be. We're so small in this giant mechanistic reality. That's where philosophically an unhealthy Jupiter consciousness ends up at. But healing that Jupiter consciousness will take that next step into faith, that there is much more to reality than we are even aware of, and trusting in the meaning that is able to be derived from all experiences. So a healthy Jupiter is going to love to speculate on these kinds of abstract concepts that may not have much to do with our practical everyday concerns. But there's a kind of joy to imagining the infinite possibilities of existence. Jupiter is this planet that generates that joy that flows within us, and that we fit in somewhere in this divine plan, and that we are even being guided by beings outside of our immediate perception that reside in the spiritual world, but are also moving within our material world, and that we can channel information from divine beings. So these are interesting subjects to speculate about, and the healthy Jupiter is able to go there, so to say, and to think about these subtle realms of existence, that it's not all this mechanistic Capricornian practical, my effort is the most important thing that exists, that there's this mystery, and we can relish in the mystery and speculate and wonder and be open to receiving new information. So what this does is it builds this confidence and a certain psychological stability, because we're able to see our fallibility and to humble ourselves, and that there are things that we'll never know, and yet feeling that that's okay. And it generates this peace of mind that it's not all up to us. Everything, the weight of the world isn't falling on our shoulders. But it's this unhealthy Jupiter that feels just that, the weight of the magnitude of existence, this burden of meaning, to find meaning and purpose in our life. It ends up with their capacity or incapacity. And that weight is simply too heavy to hold. No one is meant to have all of the weight of the world on their shoulders to create and generate this deep meaning and this deep or this kind of all-encompassing theory of how everything works. It's too heavy, and it creates this pessimistic inability to find ultimate truth. And what'll happen is that when they put so much pressure on themselves to come to these, to account for everything, that we're not meant to account for all of it, it can create this intense kind of nihilistic worldview. And nihilism is that endpoint of that there is no meaning, which could be the ultimate toxic Jupiter, that there is no meaning whatsoever, that there is no purpose, that pure atheism. You could say that that's the most toxic Jupiter, the inability to see beyond one's own immediate worldview. And even though, like Richard Dawkins, they say, oh, there's so much meaning in life, even though that there is no God. Well, I feel like they're making this kind of excuse because they understand that their philosophy is a dead end, that if there is no meaning, and that morality is just because morality is logical, that kind of worldview, that there is no divinity beyond the material perception, that it's complete materialistic worldview, they know that if there is no meaning, then there is no real structure to how things happen, that there's no actual factual basis for morality whatsoever, because nothing you do will have an effect beyond you immediately doing it, that there is no you could say karma, but there is no effect from what you're inserting into the world, like the energy that you put into the fabric of reality, it'll come back to you in some way. So in the next video, we're going to be discussing the characteristics of a healthy Jupiter. So embodying the healthy characteristics as a way forwards if you're essentially living in these traits of an unhealthy Jupiter and being too grounded in the tangible world around us, like the scientists, the materialist, atheist scientists who don't see anything beyond themselves. as that is the height of wisdom, that all we can do is investigate plants and animals and theorize about how the world is this chaotic mechanism that somehow works its way forward. It's this very incoherent philosophy. But essentially what they're doing is that they're not seeing beyond the immediate fabric of reality and the perception of human, being unable to see beyond the immediate human perception, that ability that Jupiter gives us to be able to expand our ability to understand the interconnectedness of all reality through the ether element. So the unhealthy Jupiter, the mysteries of life, they feel very dissatisfactory to them. They want to figure everything out. We can use science to discover every last possible thing to know. Science, this materialistic endpoint. And they can even be very irritated by the mysteries of life. And you're not going to see many actual philosophers with weak Jupiters, because these philosophers who end up having very large impacts, they love to think on abstract levels and things that affect all of humanity, and moralities that are expansive, and abilities to see have a worldview that is very expansive. And so they're not going to often end up in an atheistic philosophy, but it can go in so many varying ways. But essentially, this toxic Jupiter, it wants to keep everything within the five senses. And there is this kind, like I said, irritating, and they don't want to accept that there are mysteries and that there are things beyond human beings, that there are beings beyond human beings, that there is a spiritual world beyond our immediate perception that we're not meant to have full contact in this life, because otherwise our material life wouldn't be moving forward. But as a base starting point, an unhealthy Jupiter needs to work on empathizing with the perspectives of other people, on being able to see themselves from a distance and to detach from their own psychology, so that they can better see how events and circumstances are all interconnected. And it's not just this underlying chaos that human beings are organizing, and that if it weren't for human beings, everything would just fall apart, and that only our efforts are keeping the chaos at bay, and that it's our endurance of survival that is keeping the material world going. And they also say, a person with this kind of unhealthy Jupiter say that it would be better without human beings, and nature could just thrive and just be perfect. Well, they're not accounting for the necessity of souls to incarnate for higher purposes that animals aren't able to accomplish. Human beings have a unique role in order for souls to have more complex experiences. So there are so many different layers that they don't account for with this materialistic worldview. And that materialistic worldview is in part caused by the inability to see how other people are viewing the world, as I'm saying, to be able to see and be open to the perspectives of other people. So the toxic Jupiter consciousness needs to get in contact with the subtleties of experience, which is felt by using our intuition and having this healthy trust in life. So these qualities are not developed overnight. Jupiter is a very slow-moving planet. But developing them and having this gratitude for even the negative things that happen to us, but also the positive things, and having common courtesy. These are all very important to be able to develop a healthy psychology that is well-rounded, and of course, having a spiritual well-being that is able to account for and respect the divinity and the interconnectedness of all of creation.